This is Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I am delighted that Professor Fiskesjö has joined me from America in this special interview. The reason I asked the professor to join me is because I read an article, essay he wrote in The Diplomat, where he argued in great detail how a large part of the commentariat of the world had in fact fallen prey to the Chinese Communist Party propaganda against the Dalai Lama. What incident are we talking about? Well, of course, a recent infamous incident of His Holiness the Dalai Lama petting a little boy, and where he sticks out his tongue and seems to be saying, "Suck my tongue," which was instantly interpreted as something sexually predatory. And, the Dalai Lama was accused of predatory behavior around the world, in the West, in Asia, and in other parts of the world. But as Professor Magnus Fiskesjö shows in his article, this was a case of propaganda, but not just propaganda. This was also a case of great cultural misunderstanding. Professor, thanks very much for joining me in this interview.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to begin by asking you, take us through what really happened and how it happened. An innocuous video. There are countless videos of His Holiness the Dalai Lama with various people who come to see him. There was one such video. There are again countless videos of him with children. Once again, one such video came out from his office, and that video seemed to show him playing with a little boy who had come to meet him. There, while playing with that little boy and petting him, His Holiness seems to be saying, "Suck my tongue." This immediately went like wildfire around the world, and all kind of instantaneous insinuations were made about this. Connections were drawn to pedophilia and the church and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
What really actually happened?
Well, I think the first thing everyone should know is that this event was in late February, February 28th, in Dharamsala in India. And as you say, there were a lot of people there, and a lot of people were filming. And as I understand it, various versions of the filming have been put up online by people who were there. So there was actually lots of video from there. But then, on the 8th of April, a cut version appeared, a short version, which showed only this moment when the Dalai Lama says, "Suck my tongue," to the little boy, and sticks out his tongue. And based on that, this global round of misunderstanding and accusations, as you say, it got started. So my understanding is that the Chinese propaganda authorities, they are presently conducting a lot of oppression in Tibet. They're collecting children, actually, in the thousands and thousands, to indoctrinate them, to force them to stop speaking Tibetan and instead become Chinese and speak only Chinese. It's similar to what the Chinese government has been doing in Xinjiang to the Uyghur children, that they're also collecting in the same way from parents who are detained in camps. So while this is going on, I believe what happened was that the Chinese propaganda department, they were looking for distractions, potential distractions. And in this month that passed after the event in Dharamsala, which everyone was happy with at the time, they found this, and they realized that if we cut out this little piece and present that to the world, it might convince people that the Dalai Lama is a pedophile, because people will not be able to understand why he would stick out his tongue towards the little boy in the way he did, and why he would say such a thing. And so it was, you could say, in my understanding, you could say it was a convenient, potentially explosive clip that they created and then started circulated with this framing that I believe the first circulation was done by a Twitter account that was started only in February and which says that it's owned by a Chinese person who works in finance in Paris and who circulated this on the 8th of April. I think that was planted and then engineered to be spread by various bots and other trusted followers that the regime has around the world. So it gained a very large spread very quickly, based on how it resonated with people's prejudice. Everyone, like you also hinted earlier, everyone is always up in arms over the abuse of children. It's not something we want to see. And so that made it possible for the Chinese authorities to have this resonate with those feelings. And people jumped to the conclusions that here's proof that the Dalai Lama is a pedophile. Of course, had they watched the longer videos, they would have seen that this was only one part of the event, and there were many other things that went on. The boy asked for a hug. His mother was there with him, and his grandfather was there with him. The boy asked for a hug. At first, the Dalai Lama didn't understand what is a hug. His English is not perfect, as we have seen, and it was explained to him, and he said, of course, and he gave him both a hug and a handshake, which are usually not Tibetan ways of greeting, but the proper greeting in Tibet for an elderly person meeting a small child is to kiss him on the cheek and on the lips. And then there's this custom that I've learned about, and we have learned about from Tibetans explaining it, that because traditionally people would feed their babies and toddlers by mouth. There wasn't baby food in the past. You couldn't go to the grocery and buy ready-made baby food. So people would chew the food and then pass to the children by mouth. And because of this custom, they developed this joke in Tibetan, and especially apparently in Dalai Lama's own home area of Amdo, that you would say to the kids visiting you or to your grandkids, you would say that now the food is finished, eat my tongue. And that's the expression of a joking way of saying the food is finished, now there's no more. And so when the Dalai Lama said that to the little boy, what it really meant is that our session is finished. I have no more for you. We have hugged, we have shaken hands, I've kissed you in the various ways that is proper according to Tibetan custom, on the cheek and on the lips, and also we have bumped our foreheads or pressed our foreheads together the way the Tibetans do as another greeting, you could say, instead of shaking hands. And it came out as he did say, suck my tongue. And I speculate that in my article that he said suck instead of eat, which is the normal tradition of the Tibetan expression, chellesa, eat my tongue. He said suck because he probably had in mind candy, which you suck on, instead of food, which you eat. And so it came out as suck my tongue. But of course, there wasn't any intention of having the boy suck his tongue. That was not the idea. The idea was to make this old joke that is familiar in the Dalai Lama's home area. And so there was nothing sexual in this, but it was cut out of the context and presented to the world with the framing. I believe the first tweet said pedo Dalai Lama, so accusing him of being a pedophile. And it's quite astonishing how it then caught fire, how people around the world, including a lot of celebrities and people who should know to stop for a moment and think and ask someone, is there something going on here that we don't understand? What is it that we're missing? If they'd asked that, or if they've asked somebody Tibetan, they would have had this explanation that I just tried to provide for everyone. And so when I understood this, I decided I had to write this article, because I think it's a shocking example of propaganda catching fire. And I think the key to understanding it is how it was set up to resonate with the pre-existing prejudice, that people jump to this conclusion that anything with your tongue, your lips, that it has to be sexual. People simply did not know that that's not the case. That doesn't have to be, and it was not meant to be. They instead chose to jump to conclusions and decide that this was an indication that Dalai Lama was doing something inappropriate, which was not the case.
Fascinating, and really, really cruel for for an elderly man to have gone through this, and that too for a man who is revered by so many people. As we saw after that, as you also must have seen, tens of thousands of Tibetans came out protesting what was going on around the world, protesting and saying that this was being misunderstood, and the kind of terminology, including you mentioned one of them, pedo Dalai Lama, that was being used for their most revered spiritual leader was absolutely unacceptable. And they certainly, as a community, as a people, would not accept it. You're a professor of anthropology. You're at Cornell. You've written books on China. I want to, I want you to help us understand something. There are two. It seems to me that there are two or three facets to this, Professor. One is, of course, the relationship between the Chinese Communist Party and His Holiness the Dalai Lama has always been precarious, but today it's perhaps more precarious than ever before. China is almost, the Chinese Communist Party is almost desperate to get the Dalai Lama out of the way. And there's been a lot of skirmishes about this. There's a lot of conversation about how the Chinese Communist Party wants to control the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. Recently, when the Dalai Lama went to Mongolia and, in a sense, discovered a reincarnation of another Lama, it caused a lot of controversy among China and the Chinese Communist Party. So there's a desperation to control that part of the narrative, because they haven't been all these years. That's one part of it, and perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that. What's going on there, and then we'll come to the other question.
Yes, it's curious. We should emphasize that this is about the Chinese Communist Party. It's about the ruling party in China. There are actually many Chinese people who are very sympathetic towards Tibetans, towards Tibetan Buddhism. There are lots of Chinese who seek out Tibetan Buddhists to learn from them and travel to Tibet because they're interested, or even to India, I believe, because they're interested and want to find out more. But from the point of view of the Chinese, the ruling Communist Party, it's all negative. It's all a zero-sum game. They have great difficulty tolerating a different opinion, a different perspective. So it's very difficult for them to tolerate the presence of the Dalai Lama that so many people revere, as you were pointing out, and it's always astonishing to find how the Tibetan people revere him and how profound this feeling is. I've been noticing this in recent days. You see news from China about how after this incident, for the first time in many years, the Chinese authorities circulated these images of the Dalai Lama sticking out his tongue. They selectively picked that shot and circulated that, thinking that they would sort of enlarge this campaign, which worked so well internationally because of the ignorance of people internationally, to inside of China and in Tibet, and it misfired because people were overjoyed to see an image of the Dalai Lama, which usually is forbidden. You can't have a photo of him, but then you'll go to jail. It's outrageous. It shows you the depth of the intolerance of the Chinese government, that they can't even allow people. They don't allow him to come back, and they don't even allow people to have a photograph of him. And it's very unfortunate. We have seen cracks historically in the monolith of the Chinese Communist Party. The party leader for a while, up until 1989, Hu Yaobang, he went to Tibet and burst out that we've been treating Tibet like a colony. We can't do this anymore. And of course, that aroused the ire of his competitors within the Communist Party, because in the game that they are playing, out of our view, I mean, behind the scenes, the power struggle within the Communist Party is often won by those who present themselves as the most hard line, the most unforgiving, and that unfortunately includes Tibet. If you're soft on Tibet, such as Hu Yaobang was presented to be, then the competition might win out. So you get these Communist Party hardliners, both at the central level and locally in Tibet, who rule Tibet very, very harshly, and who are now, as I was saying, they are increasing their oppression, and they are picking up this formula from the Uyghur genocide that's ongoing, of preventing the next generation, young people, from knowing about their own culture and from speaking their own language. So they're actually taking it out of them. And this is for real. We have evidence from Xinjiang that children that were locked away in these so-called boarding schools where they get beaten if they speak their native language, after less than 2 years, 1.5 years, they've suppressed it and forgotten it, and it takes a long time to recover. There was this example of children that were rescued because they were found out to be Turkish citizen, and Turkey helped the family get them back to Istanbul. And it took a long time for them to recover, to even be able to say hello in their own native language, to speak with their father who had rescued them. And so this is what the Chinese government is now doing in Tibet. They're collecting Tibetan children and attempting to sort of force the Tibetanness, the Tibetan identity out of them. And it's sort of hardline piled up upon the hardline policies that were there before. They were unforgiving before, but now they're trying to make sure that there will be no Tibetans in the future. And this is horrible. I think the world should be outraged, and we should be protesting, because the Tibetans have a right to exist. They have a right to self-determination, and we should support them in that.
The interesting thing, though, in this terrible story of oppression is, I heard a video of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, where he said that, the Chinese Communist Party spent years, decades trying to oppress people and remove every sign of him and every image of him. And, like when you were telling the story that, you take that one photograph and spread it, but people are overjoyed. They love the fact that they're finally being given. And he says that, look, I mean, they tried so hard to keep me away, but what's happening today in China? I'm in every home, I mean, he sort of says that, every other Chinese person wants to know about me, wants to know the word of the Buddha, and so on and so forth, right? It's very interesting how this works. I want to come to another point. The Chinese have always referred to the Dalai Lama as the wolf in sheep's clothing, so to speak, right? And they believe that, he's a separatist, he's trying to break their country, and so on and so forth. When such an incident happens, my apologies, when such an incident happens, what does this show us about the propaganda capability of the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, that is the thing, and this is why I wrote this piece in the Diplomat. I think that they have clearly been improving, and it's not just like in the past where they'll put out the hardline position of the government like they do at home, because at home they can enforce it. There's no way of opposing or protesting what the government says. People are left to just obey. But that is not the case abroad. And so in the past, the Chinese government propaganda often has fallen flat, and it can even has even seemed laughable at times because it's so stilted and dogmatic and rigid, the way it is at home. But they are discovering, they are improving, they are discovering that you have to play on the prejudices that already exist, on the ignorance that's already out there. So this is the trick they have made use of in this new campaign. They have found a new way of discrediting the Dalai Lama by having people themselves jump to these conclusions based on this incomplete hint or suggestion that was in that prepared video which they circulated from the event. And as I say in my article, on one level you have to acknowledge that it's a skillful manipulation. It is an improvement on what they have been doing before, and I think that it spells worries for the future, because they're going to try this again. They're going to try to find flaws in people to that they can amplify to discredit them. Actually, they have been doing this on a smaller scale. For example, to those people who have been able to flee from Xinjiang, people who have spent time in those camps there and who have told the world about what goes on there, they have been discredited from home in a similar way. The government has sought out their family members and siblings and forced them to go on video to denounce them. My sister is a liar. My brother is a fraud. They should come back and face justice. This is what their siblings are and family are forced to say on camera, and this is then disseminated. And most of the time, we can see through that this is the Chinese government never talked about this person before. It was never a person of interest until they're found to be revealing the truth about those camps in Xinjiang. Then suddenly, it becomes a goal of the Chinese government to discredit them. In the case of the Dalai Lama, the target, is formidable because he's beloved not only in Tibet but around the world, and he's an elderly monk that spent his life in the service of his people and his religion. And so it's difficult to find fault with him. But here they really did take this to a new level by tricking people. I've seen lots of people say, but I saw it. I saw it in the video. There's no question. How can you deny it? And it's not always easy to explain to those people who've become convinced, because they feel that it is their own judgment. They don't feel that they have been tricked and deceived by the Chinese Communist Party. They feel that I saw it. It was on TV. It was in the video clip, and so that's actually quite an achievement to be able to make people feel that this is the truth that they have themselves arrived at, even though it is fake news.
I want to ask you, this, of course, is amplified by the power of technology and social media. At an earlier date, the Chinese Communist Party couldn't have taken a video clip and spread it literally within minutes, within seconds, around the world to tens and millions of people. That was not possible earlier because this technology did not exist. It's possible today. There's another aspect to this, of course, which is that even if it was spread, if people had been more aware, like you're saying, many celebrities who should know better, educated people who should know better, should at least stop and ask, this is not just another ordinary person, this is the Dalai Lama.
Yeah.
We have never heard something like this about him ever. What's really going on? But they didn't. They immediately jumped to condemn him.
Mhm.
In India, people who claim to be, devoted, and I've always, I have seen proclaim a sort of, a reverence for him. Some of them jumped to condemn him, which was really shocking to me also. I want to ask you, this obviously shows us the sort of cultural gap that exists, isn't it? This is something that many in the East complain about readings, especially spiritual readings in the West of certain texts. That, texts which have a local context, taken and analyzed, say, from a Freudian lens, completely seem different.
Yeah.
And entirely different representations and meanings, which people who have always lived with that text for hundreds and thousands of years perhaps cannot identify or cannot recognize at all, because in
Yeah.
their cultural context, this has never been read like. This problem today exists even more because we live in a world which is so eager to condemn. On one side, there is the very strong ultra conservatives, so to speak, who want to ban this and ban that and so on and so forth, the extreme right. On the other side, the woke movement also is very quick to judge, quick to cancel, quick to label, and so on and so forth. As an anthropologist, how do you see this landmine-filled arena in which we live in, Professor?
Yes. Well, I see it as a struggle between certainty and doubt. I think certainty is often dangerous. There's an old joke, I can't remember, but someone that says, if you see someone that claims to be right all the time, you should be worried. And if they claim to be 100% correct always and forever, you should run the other way, because this is a dangerous person that makes such a claim. We should always introduce an element of doubt. The world is complicated. People have different perspectives, and this is something that we take into account in anthropology. I mean, even on a philosophical level, we don't live in reality directly. We take in the reality around us through our senses, and then we have to interpret what our eyes told us, what our ears told us that we heard, what our eyes told us that we saw. As in this case, I mean, I see on Twitter these people saying, but I saw it in the video. Are you saying my eyes are lying eyes? Are my eyes the lying eyes of the Chinese Communist Party? And I try to explain to them that, yes, have you ever heard of hallucinations? You can go out on the ocean and you will see like an island. The ships will look like islands floating. That's an illusion. They're not floating in the air, but you saw them. You wouldn't claim that they were really floating in the air. You would take into account that you've heard that sometimes this can, your eyes will trick you and fool you, and you have to stop and think, how could this be possible? So I think skepticism and doubt about what we hear is a fundamental thing. And I even personally, I think this is a distinction between totalitarianism, Chinese style, which claims to be certain about everything. Everything is 100% right. The Communist Party General Secretary is 100% right, and he claims his policies are 100% right. And on the other side, you have democracies. Well, what we do is we acknowledge that we're not going to be 100% unified in opinion. There will be differences of opinion. So how do we handle that? Well, we allow people to express them. We discuss them. We have a debate, a civil debate. We take a vote. That's the civil way, the democratic way of doing things. And it includes a certain acknowledgement that there will be some doubt. And as you say, people will have different interpretations also based on where they come from. And my favorite example is Oliver Sacks, the neurologist doctor who died a couple of years ago. He has a book, Hallucinations. He talks about elderly patients who see things, and these things are very real for them. And he makes the observation that the elderly folks who live their lives as Christians, they will hallucinate that there's an angel sitting on their bed. Then when you have a patient who lived their life as a Buddhist, there's a Buddha sitting on their bed at night. There's not a Christian angel, there's a Buddha. You can see that even when our brain is misfiring, it's actually misfiring culturally. And culture is there to influence us even when we sort of seem to have lost our consciousness and our self-awareness. So we are hallucinating about things. And so, yeah, I think that especially in this day and age, when the new media and the AI are making it possible to fake things, it places a new demand on us to be aware and as to try to spot these things and ask questions, and never do like people did in this case, jump to conclusions. And I'm very worried about how this fight will play out. And we hear about how now you can deep fake things. You can take a film clip of the Dalai Lama or of the Chinese Communist Party secretary or somebody like that, and make them sing a song or say something that they never said and never did. And how are we going to make sure that people can pick up on how that's fake and not believable? And it will have to involve a certain preparedness, a certain procedure for vetting things, to try and build trust by vetting what these various medias are disseminating and saying. It places a burden on the current Western social media companies like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. They have been insisting that we are only platforms. We only serve up whatever our users put in there as content. That's not viable. They are in effect news media today, and that places a responsibility on them for the content that's being put up. I even saw that Twitter, in this case with the Dalai Lama, they added something they call readers' comments. And those readers' comments were actually amplifying the Chinese propaganda take. They were not providing a factual response. So that illustrates the difficulty of this. You're going to have thousands of people who have fallen for this and who are deeply convinced that this is the truth, and nobody is going to alter that perception that they have built for themselves. And so I just think this is a huge challenge for us going forward.
The other point I want to come to is the fact that this is about religion and religious figures. It is particularly potent because that's a landscape already fraught with misunderstanding, fraught with violence, fraught with accusations, which actually involves every religion, not just Buddhism. We're talking about Buddhism here, but every religion has this kind of, we live in a world of this kind of misunderstanding, accusations, and so on and so forth. When you bring such technology together and such propaganda together in a world where already such misunderstanding exists, and if somebody as revered as the Dalai Lama, with the resources his office must command globally, cannot effectively counter it, what chance do normal people really have?
It's a very difficult question. Like I was trying to say, I think our hope lies in building news media that can enjoy the trust of people, because They are vetting their stories. They are not serving as a conduit for fakery, and they're open to doubt and criticism. The best news media we have, I think, are also indeed characterized by having a column or a space where they acknowledge the mistakes that they have made. That is, again, something you will not find in the People's Daily from Beijing, because they never make a mistake. And if they make a mistake, they make sure that everybody forgets it as much as possible. They hide it and bury it. But our best media or democratic countries, I think, should be trying their best to acknowledge their mistakes and this is a good case for a good occasion for this. I would say this incident with the Dalai Lama. Some of these newspapers and other media that have sort of gone along with the interpretation accusing the Dalai Lama, they should reinvestigate and admit their fault. That would be the best medicine, I think. And something like that, I think, is that kind of route is the only way of building trust in people, because otherwise you end up with a situation where people think that nothing can be trusted, nobody can be trusted, and then all bets are off. Then we'll just sink into a world of people who are experts in fooling people to following them, to build cults and followings based on falsehood. Then the field is open for them, and we wouldn't want to live in such a world. I think Dalai Lama's Buddhism does have this point that it is open also to mistakes. The apology that the Dalai Lama's office put out has also been the source of quite a lot of misunderstanding. On the one hand, there were many Tibetans who were frustrated about it. Well, we should ask the world to apologize to us. We should ask those Western news media to apologize to the Tibetan people. And I sympathize with that. But I think there was another sense to that apology. It was not apologizing for pedophilia, because there was no pedophilia. There was nothing inappropriate. So there was nothing inappropriate to apologize for. But they did say, we apologize for the hurt that this may have caused among people. I got the impression that they were admitting that whosever fault this was, it has generated negative feelings, and that's sad. So we're sad about that. We're sad that this played out in this way. And it certainly doesn't mean, like many people understood it to be, again, people will say, what are you talking about? He apologized. And I have to tell them,
no, I know what
no,
you mean, Professor. And
he
please,
didn't.
correct me if I'm wrong. But to me, it seems that is such an incredibly genuine, sincere thing. I mean,
Yeah.
it almost, the Dalai Lama constantly talks about compassion. And it seems to me that
Yeah.
even when he, who has spent his entire lifetime in service, in a sense, as we have been discussing in this conversation, has every right to feel really indignant, to feel
Yeah.
angry that, for nothing I have been targeted so brutally, yet, in a sense, manages somehow the humility to see to see the picture from all sides, and to feel the sadness, as you mentioned. Perhaps there's a
Yeah.
lesson in the brutal world that we're talking about. Perhaps that apology, if one could get to the real substance of the apology, as you just painted out, there could be hope for all of us there, isn't it?
Yes. Yes. There was a Tibetan writer, I forgot his name, who was trying to explain that it is about taking on those negative feelings on
Yes.
behalf of others. And I agree, there's something profoundly admirable about that. It involves not excusing those maligning you, but to have compassion towards them, and it is indeed a very admirable thing to be able to do. Yes, absolutely. And of course, religions have often been misused. I'm from Sweden, and today people may know Sweden as a peaceful country, and we had peace for a long time, and we are a free and democratic country. But this was not always the case. We had horrible religious persecution and the tyranny of absolute kings and horrible things. After we imposed Protestantism, if anybody tried to be Catholic, they would be hunted down and expelled from the country. That used to be the reality in my own country. And we better remember this. You know, there's not one of us in the world who's sort of clean and without guilt and responsibility in this regard. And I think that's also something that seems to be shining through in the Dalai Lama's act of compassion in sending out this apology for the hurt and misunderstanding. I forget the exact wording, but hurt that this incident may have caused. So he choosing to not even address, you know, why was I sticking out my tongue? He's not going to talk about that, because I think they may have judged it that's a lost battle. You know, if millions of people are convinced that that was a bad thing, that's not going to be something that you can fix in an instant. But having said that, I am also very gratified to see online that there are often people that make a comment. They'll say that they felt something was amiss. They felt there was something wrong. They did have this doubt. This can't be. And then when they read my article, they said, "Yes, now I get it." And
no, you know, I mean, I have read Buddhism, and I knew this couldn't be right. I didn't understand what was going on. I thought this would be something, but I was 100% sure that this can't be true. This just makes no sense. But you know, this is a very important point that you mentioned, that not only did they think perhaps it was a lost cause to address why he was taking out his tongue in the first place, but he did not even choose to vocalize the anger that maybe he himself, I don't know whether he feels anger, but at least the people close to him may have felt at being so brutally misunderstood. There was no reflection, there was no vocalization of that hurt at all.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
You know, there's something hugely redemptive and hopeful about that, isn't it?
Yes, he's certainly also he's a very deserving recipient of the Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, because he's been consistently advocating peaceful resistance.
Yes.
And I noticed something that the Tibetan Prime Minister said on BBC Hard Talk the other day. He was saying, you know, it's not that we Tibetans are not capable of violence, but the Dalai Lama has told us peaceful resistance, not violence. And that is why you don't see violent resistance. You know, of course, Tibet used to have an army, and they used to have
and the Botpa warriors and so on and so forth. I've read about them. Yes. But this,
of course,
on that hopeful note,
now.
Sorry, please go on.
No, I was just going to add that I don't think armed resistance would work against China. They have so many guns and so many soldiers that, in a sense, I believe it would almost be like a godsend to them if there could be some violence, because then they could crack down upon it. That's exactly what they did in Xinjiang. There were several terrorist incidents, and then they punish 15 million people instead of the extremists that actually committed the terrorist acts.
Well, at least in the message of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, there is, as you and I have been discussing, reason to hope, and we can therefore end our conversation on that note of hope. Professor, thank you for joining me from your office at Cornell, where, of course, you are a professor of anthropology. I really appreciate your time today, in talking to me and taking me through this entire very unfortunate incident and the propaganda that played out to target His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the supreme leader of Tibetan Buddhism. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, Professor.
Thank you.